I call you Bumpy? Should I call you Bumpy?
That's my name.
All right. Let me start right there. Where was the origin of the name Bumpy? I'd love to hear where it began and how it stuck.
It was
Your mother.
my mother and brothers started calling me that, and I kept it all my life.
I see that you were born in 1933 in Detroit, and I would love to hear your description and what you remember of what Detroit was like growing up as a boy in the 30s and 40s.
Yes, I remember every part of it. This was the times of the wars. It's just World War started, and that was when I was very young, and we lived on a boat in
In the summer.
each summer. My dad loved his boat, and he took it out of dry dock every summer very early. So I spend about half of each year. I started when I was maybe 5 years old with a little dinghy, which had a name on it, the Bumpy Jones, and that was next tied up with our boat, which we kept at the Detroit Yacht Club.
And I read that that's really where you got your start in swimming. Not only, I read some things that you wrote that you kind of got your start in swimming when you were 2 years old. Just every time you fell in, you had to not drown, so you had to learn to swim quickly just to protect yourself. But that was really where you started racing a little bit as well, swimming for the Detroit Yacht Club against other yacht clubs and other club teams. Can you tell me about the first time that you experienced racing and not just being around the water, but competing?
Well, yeah, in the summer months in Michigan, they had.
That was what his mother had made, a picture of him when he was tiny. Can you see that?
I do. I see it. Great. I love it.
So I spent most of each early summers from the time I was 4 or 5 years. But I thought everybody should have a boat, and I had my own little boat, and we had much like kids do with back around. We would ride these all up and down. We're all the true boat people. We would wave their not so pleasant things. Not us. But I did that from I was 8 o'clock. From I was 8, and then until the next 15 to 16 years. That's where I really did a lot of swimming. We were in and out of a boat, and until I started going to the Mann camp. I used the one in Detroit.
I read that you had a very important decision, that your mom and dad came to you and said they wanted you to kind of choose a path around age 12, and that it was either going to be a musical career, and I understand that you played the saxophone and the piano a bit, and you had to choose between chasing a music career and chasing a swimming career. And this was about the same time that Mann came into your life, and Camp Chikopi and some of those things that you went on to do. Tell me about that decision and how you made, that decision to say, I'm going to pursue swimming.
Well, it was a tough decision. I was a decision I had, even in my grade school, I had played the saxophone, and but I spent a lot of time doing that from the time I was about probably 4 or 5 years old. And I sort of thought that everybody did that. I didn't know it was very crazy just to be a trombone player, but I was. But it didn't have anything to do with the swimming at the time. My father.
He was a pharmacist, right? And I read that everyone in the family, all your siblings, your mom, everybody all worked in the pharmacy. And I hear you made chocolate sodas. Was that your job at the pharmacy?
Well, that was one of the things.
Sure.
The other thing was cigarettes. I can remember when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. I had some down to selling the cigarettes. None of my family smoked, and I didn't smoke, but that was a good way to do it.
I read a really interesting quote that you wrote where you said that Mann adopted you as a difficult and uncooperative son. Tell me more about the relationship between you and Coach Mann.
Oh, we had a good connection. He was a wonderful man, wonderfulness. And I would frequently, what I would do, even when I was early years in grade school, I would either get some to take me or to go up to where the University of Michigan was. And this is when I was probably, I started going up in the days of, and we would always go there, which they did with a lot of other young swimmers. It was a good way to teach them. And
how old were you at this time? Like 14, 15 years old? I read that you were swimming with the Michigan swim team and they're All-Americans when you were a boy.
Yeah, that's about right. Michigan had some very good swimmers from that era. And I would do their Saturday or Sunday workout. And they could do a lot of that. That keeps you in the fold. That when you then finally got through high school, you knew where you were supposed to go to school. And I never really had another thought about going to another school.
I don't know if Mike...
even though later on I did run across some people who were...
I don't know if the coach at Ohio State knew that they didn't have a chance to get you. They sure tried, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
But
well, I wanted to get to that in a second, but I had definitely a ton of questions for you here that about kind of what happened next year. So you're training at Michigan, on the weekends, and you're developing as a young swimmer. And, one thing that I found in my research about you, Bumpy, is that one of the things that was really cool about the Detroit swimming scene at that time is it was well covered by the Detroit papers, and you may have been on the front end of this, but throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s, high school swimming was just a really, really big deal in the state of Michigan, and it was well covered. And so I've been able to find a number of great profiles that were written about you by the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press in 1949 and 50, as you were just putting on a show nationally. And one of the things that I found just beginning our conversation with you was that really from the time you were a sophomore in high school, you were the best IM swimmer in America. And I read that you broke the national records throughout your sophomore and junior and senior year of high school. in the 150 IM. This was before the introduction of the fourth stroke, but at a time in the early 50s, you were the best high school IMer in America throughout your high school career. Tell me about that time in your life and what that was like to be getting that attention for breaking national records.
Well, we had we did have a lot of activity, and a lot of guys who were going to become very good swimmers. Unfortunately, they don't always go to from one to another. Even though most of them went to the University of Michigan, but some did not. Some went to other. But we still spent a lot of our with the camp, Mann's camp, and that's where we spend all of our summers. And I spent every summer from the time I was about 10 years old till I was 25 years old. And so it was a wonderful place to train. Yeah, there are reporters, there are people from the Detroit News and the Detroit paper. I assume they still have the same name. And so invariably, you got, particularly if your team did well, and we did very well. And we've been not only in swimming, in our high school, which now doesn't exist. It's been scrubbed away too bad, because it was a superb high school, not only for swimming, but for football and other things. They had some wonderful athletic guys. And being very fond of the school.
He has all the boxes that his mother collected, every single newspaper clipping. We have them all.
I love it. If I fell into that box, Bumpy, I probably wouldn't come out for about a month. I'd be interested in every single ribbon and medal that you saved. You know, one of the things, Bumpy, and I wouldn't expect you to remember every single one of these details, but I'm going to throw some stories out that I read about you, and maybe you can corroborate them for me or tell me if that sounds familiar to you. But during the 1950 season, I read that you broke the national record in the 200 freestyle at least 4 times. I read an article where you had done it at least the 4th time that season. And in the process, you went 159.7 in the 200 freestyle, making you the first Michigan boy ever to break 2 minutes in the 200 freestyle, which might have seemed like a notable accomplishment at the time. But it took another 9 years until a fellow named Owen Kleinschmidt came along from Ann Arbor High School, who would do it again in a sport where the sport was, in a time when the sport was changing so quickly and kids were getting so much faster. Bumpy, you swam times in 1950 that no Michigan boy did for a whole decade. While the sport was evolving and interval training was being introduced and kids were getting much faster, they couldn't go as fast as you did in 1950. And I'm curious, you know, just that 200 freestyle specifically, that, you know, going under 2 minutes, I wonder if you remember breaking 2 minutes or what those national records specifically meant to you that year?
I don't remember what the name was, but I did have some good years in those. And I had a great high school swimming coach who was actually he didn't know anything about swimming, but he knew a lot about kids in school, and he would guide you, and I wrecked him, and he did a wonderful job with Redford High, knowing a lot of things we won there. We won the city championships and various other things. We were barred one year from this city championship because they thought that it was not a fair business, so they didn't let us play in the champ. And but it was a lovely way to start, because it was I went from high school to be with Mann and his where, and that's how I got connected with Michigan.
Yeah. Bumpy, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, you kind of touched on it. In one of the articles that I read in one of the Detroit papers, it referred to whether, you know, what you would have done at the state level had you been allowed. And I've spoken with other swimmers from the early 60s that mentioned to me that the Detroit schools were not even invited to swim at the state championships until right before they had started swimming.
Mm-hmm.
And it all makes sense, because I've been going through some of these state meet results and I can't find you in them. And I not like stumbled across you in newspaper articles. I might have missed you because you weren't in state championship meet results, but then I found all this news coverage on you and found what you were doing in other meets. Can you tell me about why Redford didn't swim in championship meets, and also some of the politics of what you just referred to, that you weren't invited to certain meets? What was going on there?
Well, there was this block. They didn't want, the other schools didn't want to have us in there to start with. And therefore, when they had a reason, they then took all these guys who went to school in Detroit City schools, couldn't be in the state championship. So consequently, I missed a lot of guys I ended up with in college with, who we kid constantly. They would say, how did you possibly get in there when you did? We did because we had a lot of very good swimmers, but that there was any player who was going to do it in your own home pool. I had a year-round practice that I was doing, but probably, in retrospect, may not have been allowed at that time. I don't know. Nobody has said, and
I don't think there's any chance that they're going to go back and rule you ineligible for any practice violations that may have been committed during the 1949 season. We're not. I don't think there's any risk that we'll get you caught for any rule violations at this point. The statute of limitations has got to have passed on any of those practice rules. I wanted to ask you, in something that I read that you wrote, you referred to the Rouge pools. Are those the same pools that the 60s guys refer to as the Brennan pools?
Yeah, the Brennan pool was what I remember. Yeah.
I mean, when they talk about that facility, and obviously I know that you chose not to swim at the 1956 Olympic trials to pursue your medical school, but the 56 Olympic trials were held there, as were the 1960 Olympic trials, which had to have just been an amazing thing for any, Michigan affiliated swimmer, for the Olympic trials and the best swimmers in America to come to Detroit in those years, and to have a facility like the Brennan pools with 3 50-meter pools there, that the city could enjoy year round, but that was actually a facility that the best swimmers in the country would come to decide who would represent them at the Olympics. That must have been pretty cool to have a facility like that in your city, and I know obviously that you swam there. Can you tell me about your memories of those Rouge pools, as you called them, or the Brennan pools as I knew them?
Yeah, we had lots of activity to compete all the time, except we couldn't beat the championships. So they kept blocking us on here, which at the time, we didn't give a damn. We said, just another, we can still swim in another pool and set up and make that, and that goes nationwide, but it doesn't go through Detroit. So and so they made all sorts of cockamamie reasons of what we could do and couldn't do. But it was probably a good race to keep us together.
It's honestly, it sounds like a terrible time in Michigan high school swimming, honestly. Like, it's, just to like kind of uncover these stories with you and some of the research that I was doing and kind of learning a little bit about this. Like, I'm certainly glad that they got those politics straightened out by it's unfortunate for you that you weren't allowed to shine at state meets and break state championship or state records there, because that's what you would have done. But certainly by the early 60s, they had figured it out and were allowing all that great talent that preceded you in the Detroit area, or followed you, I should say, to shine. I'm glad that they figured that out. I mean, what a sham, honestly, to hold anything called the state championship and not have Bumpy Jones there, who's setting national records. What kind of state championship is it if Bumpy Jones isn't there? That's what I say.
We had a lot of strange little rules.
Yeah.
Would show up at some of the pool. Sometimes it said you couldn't use something like they would, you can't do this, you can't do this, and it didn't really affect our own plan. But usually the swimming coaches had a little fun thing between them.
I'm sure. I wanted to ask you about this trip to Bermuda. I'm sorry, no, I want to get there. But first, I read that you went to Florida for the first time when you were 14. It sounded like that was an eye-opening experience. That you swam at a casino pool there and competed there when you were 14, and that was your first trip to Florida, and maybe planted a seed in your mind that might be a cool place to live someday. But I read that was kind of an eye-opening experience for you.
We would still be swimming either for the school it came out of or something else. But I got away from the ideas of somebody making in Detroit that you shouldn't do this and shouldn't do that. And it didn't really affect what we were doing, because we're going to do what we wanted to do anyway.
I read that you won your first junior national championship in the 800 meters in Baltimore around the first summer in high school. So maybe I think around 15 years old. Do you remember going to Baltimore and winning that first junior national championship?
I remember it very well, because it was to me a very big deal. When I got there that day, it was raining, and it was raining hard, and it rained the whole meet. Getting things boarding into the pool, and people worrying that you're going to get killed in the pool. It's a lousy pool, I remember, but for me it was a really important pool because it was a national championship, and it was held, but an awful pool and very.
What happened when you were swimming and it was raining?
With the heat, whatever it was you already did it at night, with this night late flicking and breaking. About every 2 or 3 seconds, another bulb would go off, and you'd shower in the pool. They didn't really worry about us because they were losing all their little accurate things.
In other words, as they were swimming, I remember him telling me this years ago, that was pouring down rain and there were lights strung above the pool, and the light bulbs started popping, breaking over their head. And they just kept swimming.
We just, I think the race was either a half, well, whatever it was still a national championship. And I had a chance to get it. And it was and I don't know that the pool is still, I doubt that it, maybe if it was, I'm sure it's been broke, but it was in a very bad part of the city. And you really didn't want to be hanging around there once you were through. And it was all of these things were waiting till you get into school, into college, and which is what we were there for.
So to summarize this whole experience, Bumpy, they sent you to a bad part of Baltimore. It was a terrible pool. It was raining. You swam too late at night. The rain was popping the light bulbs, but the only thing that mattered to you for those 800 meters was there was a national championship on the line, and there was something for you that came along with that, and that was potentially a college scholarship or an opportunity to further your life. All these other factors that were going around didn't matter because of what was at stake. Did I summarize that fairly accurately?
Yeah, prior to that thing, I had not had any real exposures to various, and this was a chance to, and then you can start to look at the swimming little coming up, the people that you were going to meet later on, but I didn't know any of them. So it didn't make any difference whether they knew me or I knew them. These were in early years of swimming. Nobody really paid much attention to who it was and who was doing it.